Hey guys, Mike here. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for being here. Subscribe, check out my other South Park videos and just my other videos in general. I have been covering and unpacking the philosophy behind all of the South Park episodes from season 26, and this week is the season finale, which is such a shame. They used to do like 10, 12 episode seasons every year, but the structure of this show has changed so much. Now, 6 episodes in a season, plus we do get some of those longer movie-length special episodes, which I think are cool, but would have loved to have more episodes. But yeah, please check out some of my other South Park videos, subscribe. I'm going to be continuing doing videos like this, hopefully once a week, unpacking a bunch of stuff, whether it's movies, TV, or general pop culture or news, current affairs. So please subscribe to my channel, help me grow, help me get my views up, and all the rest, thumbs up the video. But this episode was interesting for a few reasons. Number one, because it calls back to a period of the show's history in which Mr. Garrison was Donald Trump, essentially. And that was a while ago, particularly during the election period back when Donald Trump was elected. And that's how they were satirizing those moments of history. And personally, back then, it got to this weird point in South Park where they were doing serialized seasons, where instead of kind of what we had this time around, where all the episodes were sort of very individual, focusing on one kind of political or satirical point that Trey and Matt wanted to make, back then, for a few seasons, they did full serialized episodes. And personally, I wasn't a big fan of that era. I just really enjoy this structure that we had this year of just, one-off episodes that are loosely linked, but they have, their own points that they're making. And that's because, I don't know, the seasons that I really loved as a teenager were like seasons 12 through 15 or 16, where, you had episodes like The Ring, or The Coon, Margaritaville, or P, like all of those episodes that were just one-off social investigations or social satires, and I really like that traditional structure of the show. But we also still get those extended episodes, which I think are more serial-esque. But not only does this episode do a callback to that and also satirize sort of the position of Donald Trump at the moment in the media leading up to the 2024 election, but also looks a lot at Andrew Tate, toxic masculinity, and a lot of other themes that are very prevalent in today's discourse. I'd love to look at first at the Andrew Tate stuff because I did find this really, really funny. Of course, Andrew Tate is a somewhat problematic, misogynist guy who became very big on TikTok for a while and was kind of seen as like an answer to young men who I suppose in some ways have been arguably affected by a shift in discourse and a shift in dynamic over the last 10 years. There is an argument that a lot of people are demonizing men, making men feel like they are bad, and raising young men in this environment really kind of, there's a disconnect, there's a feeling of them not belonging, there's a feeling of them being outsiders. And this feeling that young men have growing up in this world where they're seen almost defaultly as villains, and even in some extremes being made to apologize in school to females and other stuff like that, which does feel like a huge overcorrection. I think when that happens, a lot of young men start to need to turn to someone, which is, I guess, where you get the rise of these controversial figures. And when I say controversial, I think that's a very big spectrum, because I think there's controversial figures on both sides of the political spectrum. But you get people like Jordan Peterson, you get people like Isaac Butterfield here in Australia, you get people like Andrew Tate, who is probably like the top of being this, but also being really bad and a bad influence and saying some really problematic things. As much as I hate the word problematic, I think he's really at the top of that. And I guess the key satire and conflict in this episode sees Sharon and Shelley go away on a girls' weekend for spring break, and Randy kind of goes into this frat boy, classic kind of, frat party guy, sex-obsessed guy who is so glad the chicks are gone and he gets to have the house all to himself to do whatever he wants with Stan, boys' weekend, all of that kind of stuff that is maybe modernly seen as toxic male behavior. Personally, I hate the term toxic masculinity. I actually hate the term toxic in general. I think it's lost all meaning over the years. I think now it's just something that people say when anyone does anything they don't like. But I think there is a grounding for there being some behaviors of masculinity that are maybe more problematic than others. But I also think that applies to all genders and all behavior. So I don't think it's really localized to a certain group of people. Stan sees this opportunity to invite Tolkien over to play Warhammer, and that is all they want to do. Just play this nerdy RPG tabletop game that they have a lot of fun playing. That's all they want to do. And Randy, being the typical kind of jumping to conclusions, happy-go-lucky person he is triggered by this and believes that their masculinity is being squashed by modern politics, which I guess is an angle that a lot of people seem to have now, that, you know, like, men aren't allowed to be men and masculine behaviors are seen as negative and toxic and masculine behaviors are bad. But I think the satire is Randy doesn't understand that the things he is doing are very much attuned to this hyper-masculine behavior that can become problematic, whether that's over-sexualization of women, drinking to excess, becoming aggressive and violent through alcohol. And of course, this is when Andrew Tate's modeled character shows up and becomes part of the show as well. And Randy really believes this and doesn't want Tolkien and Stan to be playing Warhammer. He wants them to be doing these things like drinking and partying and engaging with strippers and whatnot, whereas he can't see that those boys just want to do that, and it has literally nothing to do with them being worried about being perceived as toxic men. They literally just want to play this game. Randy sees it as an affront on masculinity. And I guess I'm trying to think of what this actually means or stands for. I suppose there's this angle that a lot of people who are claiming that masculinity is being squashed and is no longer there are actually just people who want to do shitty, aggressive things and want to behave wildly and flippantly with no accountability. And that's sort of what Randy is doing. And he's like, this is what blokes do. This is what men do. We do this stuff. And I think that is problematic because he can't accept that his son and his son's friend, who are both male, just want to play a game. And I think, obviously, including an Andrew Tate caricature really lends itself to this because he, in the real world, is this person who is saying that men should be allowed to cheat on their partners and men are more aggressive and that is just the natural way of men to do these things, when really I do agree with a lot of the more progressive view that men are systematically set up to be those things and that we aren't taught the skill set or we aren't learned in being vulnerable and being emotional and being able to display our emotions in a respectful way, or even just being able to communicate about things that we want or things that we feel. And as I said, I do think there's this weird overcorrection of like extreme feminism that tries to tear down men. And I do think that is a problem in some aspects, but I also think that there's definitely this middle ground where men should be able to acknowledge that maybe there is a benefit in being more vulnerable and being more emotional and just being able to say what they want. But there is this like macho, brash thing ingrained in a lot of us, a lot of men, that we need to be a certain way and act a certain way to be seen as powerful or manly by our peers. And for Randy, playing tabletop games isn't that. Why are these kids not wanting to hang out with these strippers or drink or have this big party with me? But I do think there is something to say about the system and the climate we are living now, that young men are drawn to people like Andrew Tate, who is particularly problematic, who almost gives them this false hope of indiction that they aren't a problem and there's nothing wrong with any of these behaviors. And I think it's a real confusing time, and I understand why this guy is able to become one of the biggest spokespeople for men and men's right in the world. In the other side of this story, we get Mr. Garrison on holidays with his partner, reckoning with his past as Donald Trump. Again, I didn't care too much for this subplot because I didn't care too much for the Mr. Garrison being Donald Trump plotline, but I did appreciate the irony and the satire that the episode was bringing in terms of, one, speaking to what's going on with Donald Trump in the real life. There's all these like there's constantly been this talk of him rerunning for election. Recently, he's been at risk of being arrested, and there's just a lot going on with him. And I think the last thing a lot of us want is to see Donald Trump re-elected, which seems so unlikely at this point. But Mr. Garrison does make this funny line towards the end of the episode where he says, depending what happens, I might be back. And I guess they're saying if Trump does kind of become president again, which again seems very unlikely, but also maybe not outside of the realm of possibility, that maybe that character will return. And I think that openness around that is actually really a testament to South Park as a series. Again, we all know this, but the fact that they do write, animate, voice act, and publish these episodes within 6 days is such an incredible feat that allows them to respond so quickly to real world events in a way that most other cartoons especially simply cannot do in such a topical way. And that's why I think the discourse around this show is often so poignant, because it is so topical and it is just a mirror reflection of what is happening in the real world with a great satirical message. Overall, I thought this episode was really fun. I also thought this season was great, one of the strongest for a while. Really disappointed we're not getting more episodes, and I hope there's a special really, really soon. But overall, an extremely strong season. Some really great satire. The one thing I wish they would have done is a little bit more on Hogwarts Legacy and the backlash against that game. I think Trey and Matt could have had a really great perspective on all of that, and J.K. Rowling and all of the above, but maybe it's just not something they wanted. But tackling things like Prince Harry and Meghan, ChatGPT, all of this stuff that is so poignant in our day-to-day lives now that maybe we don't realize, but what South Park does is it captures these things that are big things happening and just goes, here's our perspective on it, and I love that. So that's my thoughts, and that's wrapping up the season. There's a whole playlist on my channel. If this is the first one you've watched, go check out the others. And I also do a podcast and put clips up from my podcast here pretty much every day, so I'd love for you to subscribe, join my community. I've got a Discord, I've got a Patreon, I've got a bunch of content that I make, and I'd love for you to be part of it. So please consider hitting that subscribe. Don't consider it, just do it. Thumbs up, check out my other videos, and I'll see you next time. I'm going to be starting a series that's basically doing this for everything. I'm going to call it Unpacking Everything, and I'm going to unpack everything. So hope you enjoyed this. If you've watched all of them, thank you. I'll see you in the next vid. Catch you later.